this country when it comes to tariffs and what may or may not happen next. How's the chamber advising small businesses? We're going to ask them coming up tonight here on the Hill.
We look forward to that. Have a great weekend. Have a great show tonight. We'll see you.
Have a great weekend, Connell. We'll catch you next week. All right, so as I just sort of referenced there, and Connell did as well, would you look at this as we close out the week also and start the month? It is green on the screen, just 1 month removed from the big tariff rollout. But the other part of the story, China. Are they ready to deal? Hello, good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Blake Berman. This is The Hill on NewsNation. Tonight, the story for small businesses. One of the heads of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce here on The Hill, what they are seeing and how they are imploring the White House for change. Plus, have those brake pads of yours been changed yet, maybe? We'll explain why the light is about to turn green on new tariffs involving vehicle parts. Also tonight, the president takes on Harvard.
It is clear to see the next chapter of the American story will not be written by the Harvard Crimson. It will be written by you, the Crimson Tide.
Why that's not his only target, the future of funding for NPR and PBS in his sights as well. And we are live in Texas tonight with new reporting on the cartels. We'll explain how their footprint is now well beyond the southern border. But first tonight, here on The Hill, it's been 1 month since quote-unquote Liberation Day. I'm going to walk you through here in a moment sort of how we've responded as a country and how China is doing so for its part as well. Part of the story here is what's happening at our ports. The head of the Port of Seattle telling me on this show earlier this week that his port right now, at least as of this moment, hasn't yet seen significant changes.
Well, right now things look pretty good. There's still a lot of activity. We've got ships at berth right now, a couple in harbor. We're unloading cargo that was ordered months ago. Warehouses are full, the terminals are full, but we're starting to see the canary in the coal mine. All
right, so a little bit of the comma but there, right? But ports are just part of the story. Trucking comes next in many cases after those goods are offloaded. We begin tonight with our Nancy Liu. She is live for us in Southern California now, where containers are becoming part of the story there. Nancy?
That's right, Blake. Behind me, we're seeing more and more empty containers. We're also seeing more and more big rigs that are pulling over, coming to a halt. And look at this. These are truck chassis that are starting to stack up. These were in use just last week. But truckers, they're already feeling the impacts of the Trump tariffs, and things are about to get much worse this summer with a steep drop in imports. Here in Long Beach, Height Logistics is having a very expensive summer. This trucking company is in the process of shifting to a clean fleet, going all electric. Each of these 20 big rig EVs, they come with a price tag of about $500,000 each. Now, the company just started layoffs this week and have cut all trucker shifts by half due to far less freight to haul. And there's word of similar tightening at other trucking companies, some even going out of business. Check out the numbers. Trucking companies bracing for a similar downward trend. The rest of the year, a 20% drop in imports overall, an 80% drop in goods from China. For many in trucking, they are just trying to get through the next 6 months. Take a listen.
This yard costs us money, this equipment costs us money, our chassis costs us money, our employees cost us money, electricity costs us money, right? So after 6 months, I would say we would be in pretty dire situations. And that's just us. And there's hundreds of companies like us who would probably be in this, most likely be in the same situation, if not worse.
And despite that grim situation, operators here expressing hope and optimism that there will be trade deals soon and that in the long term, the tariffs will benefit this industry. Blake?
All right, our Nancy Liu live tonight in Southern California. Nancy, thank you. All right, so let's go broad here for a second, right? Because it's been 1 month since April 2nd, since President Trump stood in the Rose Garden and announced he was serious about worldwide tariffs. I want to show you just some of what has transpired since, as the narrative has certainly shifted here in the recent days, maybe recent couple weeks. For example, a reminder today of just how resilient the U.S. labor market remains. 177,000 jobs created in this country in April. Unemployment stayed level there at 4.2%. And remember, for all those fears at the corner of Wall and Broad, this week, a reminder, look at that this week. Basically, all three indices up somewhere around 3%. Now, let's zoom out for a second and look over the past month. I want to show you that story there over the past month, because the Dow, while that was down, the S&P 500, the NASDAQ, in the green as well. This is from April 2nd until now, right? Dow down, but look at those two, given everything that's transpired. However, GDP did drop in the first quarter, a wave of imports dragging that number down to a 0.3% decline, the first decline since 2022. All right, so that's some of the picture in the U.S. Over the course of the past month, by the way, the president, we know, paused many of the tariffs, but he ramped it up when it came to China, where tariffs are now at 145%. But look at what's happened in China. That country has now pulled back a quarter of tariffs on the U.S. Now, I want to show you this visual here, and perhaps maybe it explains why, okay? So look at this. Don't worry about the numbers. I want you to see the colors here. This is road congestion in China's 15 largest cities. Focus on the red here, right? You can see how there's significantly more red than green. This is a look over the past year because congestion in those major Chinese cities down 11%, as a lot of these goods have stopped moving out, right? Maybe you don't need to produce them. And China, at least publicly now, is seemingly signaling that it is open to trade talks. Add all that up, definitely a different picture than a month ago. But there are still very real concerns about what could come next. For example, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which is the world's largest business organization, wrote to the White House saying, quote, "We are deeply concerned that even if it only takes weeks or months to reach agreements, many small businesses, as they say, will suffer irreparable harm." Joining me now is Neil Bradley. He is the Executive Vice President of the Chamber of Commerce. Nice of you to come in.
Blake, great to see you.
On a Friday.
Yeah.
Thanks for being with us. So you represent something like 80% of the top 100 countries, millions of small businesses,
and
right?
everything in between.
And everything in between. So I just sort of laid it out there, right? Like stocks holding up, labor market resilient, GDP, China's dealing with what China's dealing with. The small business story right now in this country, as you see it, is what?
Well, they have the optimism that you just heard a little bit about. They want to see resolution.
Okay.
But listen, they just don't have that long to wait. We heard from a CEO, founder of a small business, pretty successful, actually was featured on Shark Tank, right? So the type of business that everyone kind of aspires to be.
Right.
And they had plans for growth, and they're suddenly getting hit with these tariffs. And they're wondering about the survivability of their business. They're not able to stockpile a whole lot of goods in a huge warehouse. They buy things as they need them, as they can sell them, because cash is short for them. And so what they're stuck with now is this open question. Well, what do I do? If I import at the current tariff, if I have to pay that, do I raise prices? Do I wait? These are just life and death questions for these businesses.
I know it's not one size fits all, right? And your inbound is nuts right now, as I understand it. Yeah. So what do you tell them then? Right? If you could speak to all of them right now, what do you tell them?
Well, I think you can't assume anything about the future. So we can have hope about the resolution of these tariffs, but it does seem that some of the tariffs may be here to stay for a while. That's why at the U.S. Chamber, we're arguing for this exemption for small businesses. We think they need that. But if we're not able to get that, they're going to have to adjust their business plans. And that means reviewing their contracts, becoming much more flexible on pricing, maybe even diversifying their business in order to stay afloat. We hope that they don't have to lay off employees, but some of us are telling us that they're looking at that as a means of conserving cash.
So what you want from a policy perspective is for the small businesses to be exempted from the tariff.
Yes.
You guys have a line to the White House when you're making that argument. How receptive are they? How realistic do you think something like this may or may not be? Or is the president just dead set on what he thinks?
Yeah, we find a lot of sympathy in the administration to the plight of small businesses. You know, the president ran on rebuilding Main Street. He wants to be able to deliver on that. The questions we get are along the lines of, well, how long until small businesses start going out of business? How long do they have? And of course, the answer varies from business to business. And I think what they're hoping is that they'll be able to conclude these trade deals fast enough that there won't be irreparable harm. But the problem for small businesses is that's a hope, that you want to come true, but it's not a guarantee, and they need something today. That's a guarantee. That's an exclusion of these tariffs.
I feel pretty safe in saying this. Had this not happened, you'd be on this show tonight talking about tax cuts.
We would be.
And the need to get tax cuts, from your perspective, passed. Here was Stephen Miller just the other day about the concept of tax cuts fitting into all this. I want to get your reaction on the other side.
The relief for small businesses is going to come in the form of the largest tax cut in American history. Companies that invest in the United States will be able to deduct 100% of that cost from their tax liability. This will be the most pro-small business tax bill in American history.
So how do you weigh a possible tax extension / cut coming versus the environment that we're in now? Is Stephen Miller right? Is it net or a gain, or not necessarily? How do you
there's no bigger champion of extending the 2017 tax cuts for small business than the U.S. Chamber.
Right.
But you had the word right. It's an extension. What Congress is working on now is preventing an automatic tax increase that's scheduled to occur at the end of the year. If they get that done, and I'm confident they will, that isn't a tax cut for small business. That doesn't mean they're paying less taxes next year. It just means they avoided a big tax increase. And so while it's really important to get done, it doesn't offset these tariffs. We ran some numbers, by the way. Small business imports about a third of everything we import. At the current tariff rates, if they're importing the same level of goods, small businesses are paying $9,000 a second in tariffs. So every second of every minute of every hour of every day that these tariffs are in place, it's a $9,000 cost to America's small businesses.
I want to leave you with sort of a word that you brought up, which is hope, right? A lot of these businesses still have hope. And I was just looking at monthly business applications, right? Let's show that. You know this, but for our audience here on NewsNation. And you see the story over the last decade. People want to start businesses, they want to grow, and they are continuing to grow. So I guess when we look out over the next 10 years, no matter what happens, do you expect that to be the same hopeful story?
The thing I love about this chart, by the way, is that big upswing that we saw a few years ago.
Post-COVID, right?
Post-COVID. COVID did change a lot of things. A lot of bad things came out of it. One of the things that did unleash was America's entrepreneurial spirit. And we started a lot of these businesses, the ones that are now 2, 3, 4 years old. We want them to be 7 and 10 years old in a few years. And the way to help them do that is to avoid these self-inflicted costs like tariffs. It's to extend the tax cut. So I'm bullish on America. The U.S. Chamber's bullish on America. We can continue this story. But if we want these businesses to survive, we need to get the public policy right. And that's to get rid of these tariffs.
Neil Bradley is the Executive Vice President. I got that right?
You did.
Over at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Always nice to see you.
Great to see you, Blake.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it. All right. Fascinating, right? As we think about everything that's gone on over the last month or so. Still to come tonight here from the Hill. You may have seen him on stage with President Trump. He's the retired auto worker, Brian Pannebecker. How does he view where we are right now? I'm going to be talking to him live. Plus, there's this.
What percentage of the country of Mexico would you say is dominantly governed by cartels?
Well, I would say a majority.
The president's pick to lead the DEA says Mexico is run by criminals. Is he right? Our Allie Bradley live tonight in Texas on what she is hearing down at the border. And remember when Elon Musk brought that chainsaw on stage? We're revealing a conversation tonight between the head of Doge and Bill O'Reilly. We'll play it for you next. Welcome to Washington on this Friday. This is the center of politics. I'm Blake Berman. You're watching The Hill. I'll see you back here in 4 minutes.
I'll tell you an inside story. So on St. Patrick's Day, I got invited to be in a cabinet meeting down at the Oval Office. Sitting next to me was Musk. So Musk turns to me and he says, how am I doing? And I said, you're doing well. You're right on track because we can't have this kind of unbelievable waste of taxpayer dollars, but the presentation needs to be toned down. This is serious. People are losing their jobs. Can't be having a chainsaw. This is exactly what I told them. And I'm not going to take credit for it, but since that time, the Musk presentation has changed.
That, of course, Bill O'Reilly talking to On Balance host Leland Vittert about Elon Musk and Doge's role as part of tonight's NewsNation special. It's called Bill O'Reilly's 100 Days of Trump. Are You Better Off? And it airs tonight here on NewsNation, 9 o'clock Eastern, 8 o'clock Central. Now, Doge, just one aspect of President Trump's agenda to reshape the American economy. Tariffs, another. A big part, and tomorrow, a reduced form of auto tariffs are set to kick in. 25% tariffs on auto parts, but U.S. auto manufacturers will get a break with some rebates on parts in American-made vehicles. The president spoke in Michigan this week during his 100-day rally, and he talked about the impact of his tariff policies.
And a lot of auto jobs coming. Watch what's happening. The companies are coming in by the tens. You got to see what's happening. They all want to come back to Michigan and build cars again. You know why? Because of our tax and tariff policy.
Brian Pannebacker spoke at that rally. He started Auto Workers for Trump. Joins me live once again here on the Hill. Brian, you're getting some prime time, some primetime placements there. You spoke in the Rose Garden. You spoke on the 100 Days. It was just you and the president, just you two. Thanks for being with us once again tonight here on the Hill.
Thanks for having me on, Blake.
Of course. So if you look at the first trade war that I covered, and I'm sure you remember, it was the farmers who got the bailout from the president, right? $29 billion as China started to ramp things up. And this go around, it's been the auto industry, not a bailout, but the president has given them some relief. Why do you feel comfortable, Brian, with one industry, the one that you used to work in, getting some help, while others don't get that same kind of help?
Well, what he's doing is, it's very, Trump is not, he's not doing something that's easy. It's very complex. It's a very complex issue, and he has a very sophisticated team of advisors that are helping him with this. They actually came to him. I spoke to him on Tuesday here in Macomb County on his 100th day in office, and we did speak about this backstage when he got there. And he explained to me briefly what he was doing and why he had to do it and why it made sense.
What did he tell you?
What happens? Well, what happens is some of these auto parts, this is how convoluted and screwed up the auto industry has become since NAFTA was passed. There are some auto parts that'll cross the border 7 times. That's
insanity. They go all over the place from one country to the next, to this one, to that one.
A lot of it is back and forth from the Detroit, Michigan area into Ontario, Windsor, Ontario area. Back and forth, because Chrysler has plants on both sides, so does Ford, and it's just really insanity. So what Trump is doing, he's not excluding Canada, who are our friends and allies, but we can't exclude them from this policy change because he wants all of the part production for the assembly plants back here to the Detroit area, into Michigan.
What's your argument? What's your argument, Brian? Yeah, no, I hear you. What's your argument to folks who might now go to get, they need a tune-up, whatever, a new part, and then bang, get hit with the bill, and wait a minute, it didn't used to be that much?
Real simple. Be patient, have faith, and trust Trump. Listen, where were all the media concern and all the, everybody's running around with their hair on fire? Where were they for the last 30 or 40 years when we watched plant after plant after plant shut down and they moved our jobs to Mexico? Ever since NAFTA got signed into law in 1994, we've been losing jobs. Not 100 here, 100 there. Thousands, tens of thousands of jobs. An auto plant can employ 7,000 to 8,000 people if they're running 3 shifts. Nobody seemed too concerned when they were moving them down to Mexico. Now all of a sudden, because we have a 90-day period where they need to rearrange their supply chain, everybody's acting like the world is going to end.
I think
everybody needs to take a deep breath and relax.
I think the state of Michigan, where you are, was 900,000 manufacturing jobs at the start of the century, now down at about 600,000. You're in Michigan. Your governor is Gretchen Whitmer. You're a supporter of Donald Trump. She's the Democratic governor. And there was this scene, Brian, let me leave you with this real quick. There was this scene where she gave Donald Trump a hug.
Jeez.
What do you make of the governor doing that?
She has to, well, listen, I'll give her a little bit of credit for kind of reaching across the aisle. Donald Trump is the guy she had. She was going to him asking for help. He gave it to her. So let's give him the credit, not the governor. She
You don't give her a little bit? You don't give her a little bit, Brian?
I said let's give her a little bit of credit for reaching across the aisle, but the majority of the credit goes to Donald Trump. She tried to get Joe Biden to help her out with bringing these new planes into Selfridge Air National Guard Base. He didn't do it. So she got help from a Republican. So Donald Trump is the guy who deserves the credit for this, not Gretchen Whitmer.
Brian Pannebacker with us tonight from the state of Michigan. Thank you, sir. I'm sure we'll talk to you again. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, Blake.
You got it. All right, still much more ahead here on the Hill. We're taking you to the other side of the country, down south. Our Allie Bradley, live tonight from Texas. Why the president's pick to lead the DEA is making some pretty big claims about Mexico, and a major step today taken at the Sistine Chapel ahead of the papal election when the Hill returns. .30 here in Washington on this Friday night. Thanks for being with us tonight here on the Hill. Some new reporting today that President Trump has been pressuring Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum to let the U.S. military potentially take on cartels in Mexico. The Wall Street Journal reporting that, quote, tensions rose toward the end of a 45-minute telephone conversation with the Mexican president on April 16th when the president pushed to have U.S. armed forces take a leading role in battling Mexican drug gangs. Mexico's president refused to accept a direct U.S. military president. It comes as President Trump's pick to head the DEA, not mincing any words about the threat at the southern border, going so far as to say that Mexico's government is working, quote, hand in hand with the drug cartels. Our Allie Bradley with the story down along the southern border once again this evening. Allie?
Yeah, hey, Blake. So we've been reporting for years now. The DEA has said the cartel is present in all 50 states. And now we hear the agency, the man that the president has tapped to be the director of the DEA saying, hey, we go one further here and say that the cartels are actually controlling Mexico and essentially governing the country. Take a listen here.
We've seen traditionally the military working hand in hand. We've seen police officers working hand in hand with cartel members. I saw the cartel's coercion of government institutions, intimidation of law enforcement, and their brutal enforcement of control over entire communities.
Okay, so now when it comes to the issue of guns and drugs coming in and going out of the country, a big issue that Claudia Sheinbaum has said is that the United States needs to look at its own situation first when it comes to the flow of fentanyl, saying it's all being distributed within the United States. But again, the cartel is present in all 50 states. And everybody down here when it comes to law enforcement says when it's guns and cash going south out to Mexico, that means the cartel had a successful transaction coming into the United States. Now, when it comes to the issue of trust with Mexico, Border Patrol, we've talked to them several times who say the trust is there with Mexico and they lean on them and they're doing their part. But then as soon as the cameras go off, the reality here is that oftentimes Border Patrol and sources, they tell me Mexico isn't doing enough and that they are part of the problem. One of those examples I have with me right here, Blake, they're actually visas. They're laminated humanitarian visas. Now, the president of Mexico at the time had said, hey, we're giving people the right to live and work here in our country. Well, these, you aren't living and working anywhere for 40 to 45 days with a visa marked transit. So, Blake, these literally acted as a fast pass, getting people past the checkpoints and right to our back door of the United States. So it makes sense that the new director of the DEA is calling out Mexico, saying, hey, you are being run by the cartels and there are issues here that we need to handle, right? So we'll see how that goes. We expect that, you know, there will be some moves there because Sheinbaum's saying, look at your own country first. Trump is saying not so fast. Like,
so, you know, it's interesting, Allie, because on this reported phone call between the president and his counterpart there in Mexico about the possibility of maybe the U.S. military being involved, you asked this to the Vice President J.D. Vance a month or so ago. I asked this to a senior advisor to CBP just last week, Customs and Border Protection. If we're using drones against the Houthis in the Middle East, which is a foreign terrorist organization, Would the administration ever consider using drones on the cartels in Mexico, which the Trump administration has now labeled as a foreign terrorist organization? The VP at the time wasn't willing to go there with you. The sense that I get is the administration isn't willing to go there now. But once you hear about conversations like this, you have to wonder if, and I don't know if, the administration could ever go down that road.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting because we've talked with congressmen too, like Juan Ciscomani, who has a lot of stake in what's happening at the border in Arizona. And he said, you know, I asked him, I pressed him very heavily on that topic specifically. Are you in support of going over, breaching that airspace and using drones against the cartels? And at the end of our conversation, he essentially said, listen, that is opening up Pandora's box for a different conversation, Blake, but he does support every tool to be utilized if American personnel and Americans are at risk here. So it will be interesting to see, but you hear ad nauseum the administration say, hey, we really expect Mexico to do their part here. We're going to lean a little bit harder on Mexico because I don't think anyone wants bomb-wielding drones from either side handling the cartels because we know the cartels has those capabilities, right? And then we also know when we've talked about Border Patrol, we don't have as good of technology in some capacities as the cartels because we have checks and balances here over on the federal side. We aren't using Chinese technology and agricultural drones that can wield bombs. So those are things that they would have to, you know, figure out and go through. But those are definitely nuanced pieces here when it comes to that conversation. And Sheinbaum once again saying we would 100% unequivocally revoke that idea. We do not do that. We are not allowing you to breach that airspace. But also interesting here because there was a screwworm issue with AG Secretary Rowlands, and she talked about wanting to breach the airspace and go into there. They fixed that, but it'll be interesting to see if that's a way in, Blake.
All right, Allie Bradley, live along the southern border. Allie, thanks for joining us tonight. Appreciate it. Joining us now is the Democratic congressman from the state of California, Ami Bera. I believe we have the congressman hooked up. There he is. Thanks for being with us tonight on this Friday here on the Hill. Yeah, thanks for being with us and getting to us so soon. So there's this conversation about the southern border. You're in California, obviously a border state. And we've seen what's happened along the southern border, Congressman, especially with encounters, right? They're down more than 95% or somewhere in that range under the Trump administration. The administration came out today and said, you know what? We believe that $175 billion in funding should go forward to secure the southern border. The reason I bring that up is I wonder if you think the president has built up the political capital, given what's happened at the southern border, to say, yeah, give DHS the money it needs.
You know, so I will give the president success where success is due. The southern border and illegal crossings have gone down. The American public voted for that, and he's delivered. Do we need $175 billion more? Maybe, but again, he's succeeding with what he has available. So, you know, if it's tactical, if we're using it to address the drug cartels, address fentanyl trafficking, great. Come to Congress and let's talk about it. And I think we're willing to negotiate.
All right. I want to ask you about your party. I mentioned you're in the state of California. There was a little bit of an event there in the middle of the week with the old Vice President, Kamala Harris, sort of reemerging in your state. And we're starting to see more of this, right? Pete Buttigieg is heading to Iowa. Governor Wes Moore is heading to Pennsylvania and South Carolina, all in the upcoming weeks. These are names that are possibly being talked about for your side of the aisle as potential future leaders in the upcoming years. In your state, with VP Harris, there's talk about her maybe running for governor or her running for president once again. What do you think she should do? What are you hearing?
You know, given that she gave that speech in San Francisco, I have no inside knowledge, but I guess she might be thinking about running for governor. She was a good attorney general. She's served the state of California well as a senator. And, you know, I think she would be a formidable candidate if she decided she wanted to run for governor.
You think that's the best path for her?
Well, California is the fourth largest economy in the world. We're on the front lines. Yeah, I don't think Trump is particularly fond of California, so we may be in battle, but you know, we will look for places to work together. And again, she's served California well throughout her career.
Let me take you out of your state. There was a poll in Georgia, right? Georgia's obviously a state we watch a lot. There was a poll in Georgia, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Democrats, what do you think about the Democratic Party? Only just 35% in that state had a favorable view of the Democratic Party. What is the brand right now of the Democratic Party as you see it, Congressman? How do you improve that number if you even can? I mean, that poll right there caught my attention.
Yeah, I think people are pissed off right now. They're angry. They're worried. They're watching their 401ks drop. They're worried about, the cost of groceries, everything else. And now Republicans are talking about taking their health care away. We're going to see what happens. I think people are angry. They're worried. Donald Trump's, at 102, 103 days. The honeymoon period's over. We will.
What do you guys have to do? I hear you on the anger. What do you think the party has to do? Because there's this big conversation about who's the leader. Do you move to the middle? Do you move to the left? I just heard you say give the president credit on immigration. You'd get absolutely destroyed in some corners of your party for saying that.
Yeah, but you know what? Joe Biden probably lost the election. We probably lost the election because we didn't act soon enough on the border, and the public spoke on that. We didn't do enough talking to the public about the prices of their groceries and so forth. I think that's why we lost the election. I think that's why Donald Trump won the election. So we've got to understand that, learn those lessons, talk about the things that people care about. Donald Trump won on the economy. I don't wish ill on the American people. I hope he's right on tariffs. But if prices don't come down, if the cost of groceries don't come down, then they're going to be in a real hard problem. If they take health care away from folks, they're going to have a real issue. I think it's not to be against Donald Trump. We've got to tell people what we're going to do to make their life.
All right. We'll leave it there. Again, thanks for hooking up with us tonight. Congressman Ami Bera, Democrat there in California. Have a nice weekend, sir. Talk soon.
Welcome, people.
All right. Still to come tonight here on the Hill, the president's fight against one of the top, maybe the top, university.
They run a bad operation up there, and we have to get to the bottom of it.
What the president is suggesting tonight about Harvard University and their many, many, many billions when the Hill returns.
President Trump's new agenda.
We're going to become a wealthy nation again.
100 days in, does Bill O'Reilly think you're better off? The best-selling author pulls no punches. Bill O'Reilly's 100 Days of Trump tonight at 9/8 Central on NewsNation.
All right, welcome back here to the Hill on NewsNation. President Trump today saying that he is going to pull the tax-exempt status of Harvard. And this should not come as a shock to our audience. If you've been watching the Hill in the recent weeks and months, mid-March is where I'm going to direct your attention to. When Harvard, you might remember they announced they were basically going to increase the number of students to receive free student aid. Well, Mick Mulvaney said then that he suspected there could be something bigger at play. Watch.
I think they're doing it because of the tax bill.
Because of the endowments.
The tax bill is coming after the endowments, and what Harvard wants to be able to say is, look, if you tax us, we'll have to take this benefit away. It's a good thing they're doing, but is it a coincidence they're doing it now? I don't believe
so. How about that? And today, the president added two more potentially to the list, revealing that he signed an executive order slashing federal funds to NPR and PBS. Now, those American institutions, everyone aged 1 to 100 basically is familiar with, in addition to the oldest university in this country. They could be going through some big changes. $686 million in federal funds, for example, goes to Harvard. That doesn't include Harvard's significant endowment fund, which is valued up to $53 billion. And as of this fiscal year, Congress approved a budget of $535 million for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which distributes funding to PBS television and NPR radio networks. Full panel here with me now. Lance Trover is the former spokesperson for Doug Burgum's presidential campaign. Dan Cannon knows a thing or two about presidential campaigns. Also, he was the Battleground States Director for the Biden and Harris campaigns. And look who we have with us tonight as well, Michael Schnell, congressional correspondent for The Hill. Joe Khalil, NewsNation Washington correspondent. Hello to you all. Happy Friday. I got myself covered. Two folks on campaigns, two of the best reporters I know. Here we go. Let's do it. Trump today, Harvard, NPR, PBS, Dan. I think this, if nothing else, wherever you are on the side of the issue, raises the issue for the American public. I think a lot of folks are now saying, wait a minute, we give how much to these institutions?
Well, that's what Trump wants the conversation to be, to go after institutions, especially elite institutions. He's setting up this dynamic, and Republicans have for a couple of years now, that Democrats are on the side of the institutions and the elite, and Republicans are on your side as a small business owner or a working person. But I think if you're Harvard, you're probably pretty happy he's going about it this way.
Huh, you think so?
Yes, because the IRS and the tax code and the law is very clear. The president and no one in the White House can direct that agency to do anything with an individual taxpayer or an audit, certainly not take away tax status. To do this by tweet in this sort of loud, brazen Trump way gives them the best legal case possible to fight this.
So Dan's right, because as you know, and these folks know, tax writing policy starts in the House Ways and Means Committee in that building right there. Basically, they're paying 1.4% on investment profits made from the endowments. Corporate tax rate is 21%.
Yeah, but IRS code is also very clear, and the Supreme Court's also been very clear. You can't violate Title VI or people's civil rights, which is what a federal judge has already said Harvard has done back in 2024. Their own report this week acknowledged there are problems with anti-Semitism on campus. So if the IRS is moving in this direction, my guess is they're going to have a lot of trouble, because students have felt that this is not speech, it has moved into conduct, and they fear being on campus, and I think that's the problem they're going to have.
So if this does get hashed out in the House, what's the appetite right now, Michael, for Republicans to actually go through with it and take this battle on potentially?
It's breaking along party lines, exactly how you would expect. Democrats slamming this, saying that this is illegal, no way to go about dealing with Harvard. Republicans cheering it on, saying that this is a direct result of Harvard not doing enough to clamp back on anti-Semitism. It wasn't too long ago, about a year and a half, 2 years, that Elise Stefanik had that hearing with the Harvard president that prompted the president of these universities, including Harvard, to resign. Republicans have been on this train for a while. Now they're finally seeing some sort of policy that could potentially put their money where their mouth is. Now, will it actually work? Will we see movement on it? Remains to be seen, but Republicans are hyped.
You know, there's the legal question, then there's the political question. Talked to some Republicans today. Nobody thinks it's a losing bet to take some shots at Harvard if you're a Republican. But I will say, where I think maybe the White House politically needs to be a little bit careful here is, when I went on that trip to Michigan for the town hall, I met this independent, this woman who had a kid who's going through a trial, clinical trial for a condition he has. Harvard's paying for it. So they have to be careful that they're not, going after the woke English professor, and at the expense of serious research.
All right, so we talk about some of the possible cuts. I thought one of the big stories today in this town was basically the president rolls out the budget, and we all know, but you should know, it's basically a framework, right? It's like, this is what I believe, this is what I want to do, and not a lot of it really ever gets through. But the president today, Lance, basically blessed the concept of $1 trillion Pentagon, and there's some angst in your party for this.
There may be some angst, but I think when you're talking about China, who has been going around the world with their Belt and Road Initiative and building up their Navy, building up everything, they are our #1 economic and national security foe. I think this country has to take seriously, where is our military, and are we ready to take on a country like China?
I missed the Elon Musk Doge appointment at the Department of Defense. They clearly just must have had a calendar issue over there.
So they haven't been, the DOD hasn't been passed an audit in 8 years.
Yeah.
When you look at the wall of receipts on Doge, Dan, it's like number 13 of all the agencies right now.
Yeah, but then also at the same time, Elon Musk is getting larger and larger contracts from the Department of Defense for SpaceX and everywhere else. Look, I'll say this. I think that military spending cuts a couple ways, because you can be hawkish, and that's politically probably good for Republicans. But at the same time, if you're passing this $5 trillion tax cut and exploding the deficit, and then $1 trillion to defense, and then on the IRS side, there's nearly $1 trillion of taxpayers who have not paid because they have not gone after those millionaires who have owed tax money to the federal treasury. There's a lot to work with there that Democrats can point out when they come to the budget.
Play the Trump soundbite real quick from the NewsNation town hall.
I rebuilt our military in my first term. They gave a lot of it away in Afghanistan, and Afghanistan is one of the reasons we had an incompetent president, grossly incompetent. He should have never been president, but we had a man that didn't know what the hell he was doing, and Afghanistan showed the stupidity of our leader and the weakness of the military. We have a great military. I knocked out ISIS in 3 weeks.
President wants a big military. How big does it get?
Over $1 trillion worth at this point right now, evidently. One of the interesting things I'll note is that, there are some Republicans who don't even think that's enough. Roger Wicker, chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, out with a scathing statement today saying that if we gut parts of our military, we're not going to be able to have this robust defense. So it's interesting how it falls on those fault lines.
We know Secretary Hegseth, I think, is on the record saying he's willing to make serious cuts to the Pentagon budget. But this is, as you mentioned, more than $1 trillion, 13% increase. So we heard the defense hawks concerned about cuts. It's an increase. They're even still not happy.
Thank y'all. Appreciate it. Have a great weekend. On the other side of the break, I'm going to explain a few things that I'm looking forward to. Horses, Warren Buffett, and more. My take on the other side. And coming up on Elizabeth Vargas Reports, a new UFO whistleblower coming forward. That's 7 o'clock Eastern right here on News Nation. My take on the other side of the break. Look at this, what you're seeing, Vatican firefighters on the roof of the Sistine Chapel. They are installing a chimney in preparation for the upcoming conclave. When a new pope is chosen, black smoke will emit from that very chimney. All right, time for my take now. If you've ever been to Louisville in the first weekend of May, you know today's Oaks Day and tomorrow is the big one. Is there anything more American than the Kentucky Derby? Churchill Downs, mint juleps, ostentatious hats, all of it. 20 thoroughbreds competing to be the king of the sport of kings. And wouldn't you know, the favorite this year happens to be a horse named Journalism. The co-owner, Aaron Wellman, was the sports editor of his high school newspaper, strong proponent of freedom of the press. But the Derby, not the only thing I am anticipating. From Louisville to Omaha, also tomorrow, Warren Buffett will be speaking to investors. And think about the backdrop here for a second. It's the first time we will have heard from the Oracle himself since the Trump tariffs. Now, as the 94-year-old investing legend always reminds, never bet against America. Maybe we'll learn something tomorrow about his new plays, what he views. I don't know. We'll see coming up. Another thing I'm looking forward to, speaking of coming up this weekend, shameless plug. I'm in for Steyerwalt on Sunday. Hosting the Hill Sunday, I'll be joined by Congresswoman Madeleine Dean and Congressman Don Bacon. We will see you Sunday morning, 10 a.m. Eastern, right here on News Nation. They had a nice graphic for me. I don't know where it went. I guess you'll see all of it coming up Sunday morning.